Today in the Foundations course, we're going to look at another facet of life and of biblical understanding, and it's a troubling one. It's about humanity's brokenness or their sinfulness. You know, we've looked at how God is a loving God, and he created people in his image because he loved people. But he is also a judge, and he has a moral framework which he expects people to live by. And in living by his moral framework, we exist in fellowship with God. But today we look at the fact that the first humans decided to live by their own moral code, their own moral framework. And that caused a disconnect from God, and therefore a disconnect from the everlasting flourishing that God intended for humanity. Right at the start, I'd like to read from Romans. Paul wrote this letter to the Roman church, and in chapter 3, verse 23, he says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." All have sinned. It's like Adam and Eve, because they decided to go their own way, away from God's plan, they somehow infected all of humanity with this separation, with this desire to go their own way. Paul continues in chapter 5, verse 12, "Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, so death passed to all men, because all sinned." So it's probably not a difficult thing to believe that you've sinned, that you've gone your own way. Most people, in fact, in our culture, we see it as a good thing. You follow your heart, do your own thing. It's important that we understand that the flourishing that God intended for humanity was connected with them living according to his moral framework. And you'll notice as you go through the scripture, as you open up the scriptures, you'll see some key things that try and address this situation of man's brokenness. One of them is in Exodus chapter 20. It talks about the giving of the law. Moses received the law from God, the 10 Commandments, and he gave them to the people of Israel. And these 10 Commandments are the heart of God for humans to be able to exist well together. They're good commandments. They're holy, but they're also external. Perhaps you can think of that a little bit like in our society there are rules that govern how we do life. There are road rules. And for most of the time it's okay to obey the laws. It's pretty easy to obey the laws, but if you're anything like me, sometimes you're tempted to just set aside those laws because they don't really fit with your moral framework. You know, speeding. It's easy not to speed when there are lots of cars around and there's lots of traffic, but on the open road, there's more of a temptation because in your mind you can say, well, I know this road, I know the conditions, I know my car, therefore I will break this law. We don't often go through that sort of way of thinking, but ultimately that's what it is. Human beings have this thing inside them that is that I will go my own way. And the law is an external force on humans. God's law is an external force on humans in order to bring about a flourishing. And certainly societies where there are strong moral codes, it helps for the flourishing of society. But there's more to it, and you'll find this in the scripture. An external moral law is not enough because there's something in the human heart that rails against it. Perhaps you've sensed that yourself. You experience what the law expects of you, what God expects of you as a human, and something inside rises up. It's called sin. And it's not because you're particularly a bad person, it's because humans have gone astray and we've been infected right from the start. So this is what we'll find as we unpack Scripture, as we work our way through our own life, we will find that there needs to be more than just an external moral code. And this was promised in the Old Testament, seeded in the Old Testament, ready to come in its fruition to Jesus Christ, is the idea of a new covenant, where God makes a covenant with humanity, where he says, you are going to have a new heart. I'm going to put a new heart in you. So that, here's the idea, here's the ultimate, is when our hearts are shaped so that our will conforms to his will, and our desire is to live within his moral code. That is the promise of the new covenant. So I encourage you, we haven't talked about the new covenant yet, but all I wanted to talk about today was, yes, we are broken. The original humans were broken. They decided to go their own way, set up their own moral code, and it brought destruction rather than flourishing. And it's a problem that the law, God's law, can't help from an external point of view. God bless you.